People like certainty because it's simple, and the simpler the better. This is why some of the most popular opinions right now are whether this person is guilty. And here he is again. Or this one. And here's that allegation again. It's quite simple. Did this guy do it? Yes, I think he did. Do you think this person's guilty? Yes, I do. The court of public opinion is far simpler and I think far dumber than a proper court. Meanwhile, on the ground, it appears that law enforcement haven't been able to link the backpack to anyone thus far. That is the reality of this case. Look at this from today.com. The sheriff said that authorities have not been able to identify the car in the footage. So they're aware of the car, but they haven't been able to identify it. They haven't been able to... I don't think it's about the make of the car, but for example, the license plate. And have a look at this statement. We're looking at that vehicle. That's the vehicle in the ring footage. So they are looking into that, but they aren't able, that doesn't really take them anywhere. Then he also says, we are also looking at hundreds of thousands of other vehicles that were out driving that time of day. So that's another area that they are investigating, just the vehicles. Now, I think it's more than likely dozens, if not hundreds of vehicles that are being investigated. Hundreds of thousands seems like hyperbole if you ask me. Now, in a court of law, you wouldn't be able to convict someone because they simply resembled grainy footage. You would need more than that, and that takes time. That is subtle, and often that kind of information is sensitive and confidential.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head,
According to the article in Today, let's have a look at this. Nanos added that there is still information authorities have not shared with the public. There's so much that everybody wants to know, but I would be very neglectful, irresponsible as a police, as a law enforcement leader to share that with everybody. We have information on this case that we think is going to hopefully lead us to solving this case, but it takes time. He also goes on to say the DNA has turned out to be basically a dead end, that they're still having challenges with the DNA. Now, in other news, Brian Entin reports that investigators have been searching the property using a metal detector. Could the perpetrator have dropped his firearm or his phone or a walkie-talkie? According to Jennifer Coffindaffer, this gadget is not a Wi-Fi jammer or it was a really bad one. And I kind of get her logic, which is if it was a Wi-Fi jammer, you wouldn't have gotten the person in the footage, right? Doesn't make sense. Then there's also a fella called Chris Roach who seems to think that what this is a device that basically is like a walkie-talkie. This idea that there might be a second person involved, an accomplice, is interesting, but I find it harder to believe two people would have a grievance with someone rather than just one. But two people makes the likelihood of some sort of crime being botched a greater likelihood on the other hand. After all, how would you feel if your accomplice got himself on camera and then told you, sorry boss, I think I'm on camera, should we keep going? I mean, would you still want to proceed with the plan? Now, an area I think hasn't been discussed very much is the point of entry, and that is yet another clue everyone missed. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please do hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So the point of entry, this is an area that's really not discussed very much. And have a look at this drone footage where we see the back garden. That's also not an area that they've looked into very much. Bear in mind, the suspect in this case broke in through the back entrance, not the front entrance. And yet most of the footage we see is of that front door. Now, how the abductor got in tells us an awful lot, doesn't it? It tells us not only how familiar he is with the property and indirectly with Nancy, but also how skilled he is at breaking into places. Now, the fact that the perpetrator didn't know about the doorbell camera shows us we are dealing with someone with limited intel on this property and regarding this crime scene. It shouldn't be necessary for me to even say this, but if you are one of those, by the way, if you're one of those people supporting the idea that a family member, even a brother-in-law is involved, go on, put up your hand. Are you one of those people? Okay, well then, did the family member who planned this, according to you, forget to tell his accomplices about the doorbell camera? Because he knew about it, so didn't he tell the people that were helping him about the doorbell camera? Not likely. Anyway, here's more footage of the backyard, and in this particular screen grab from the jury view, it does look like some of what has been added, security that is being added right above that sliding door. And isn't that because that was one of the most vulnerable points of the home? Now, if you accept what I say and you think about it logically and you say, okay, so we're dealing with someone who didn't know about that front door camera, well, then your so-called suspect, who's very familiar with Nancy and with the house, fizzles into nothing. Sorry about that. There goes your favorite suspect up in smoke. And why have you wasted so much time on this? Because you simply didn't think about it. And there's an even more laughably obvious reason why it can't be the brother-in-law. Anyway, the behavior of the suspect who appears not to know how to deal with the camera at the front door, and also the fact that they didn't ultimately access to the front door anyway, it's not as though they had a key, that tells us we're dealing with someone who isn't very familiar with the property. Even someone who's not even slightly familiar with the property. And that negates, again, a family member or a person who's familiar with the property. Perhaps someone who's employed on the property for an extensive period. That person is eliminated as well. It does seem to support the idea of someone who may have visited the property once or twice, someone who's like a delivery person or someone who drove by the property, someone who simply didn't notice the camera during the day or during that first drive-by surveillance. And then, of course, the question arises, which door did the perpetrator use? Now, we know he didn't use the garage door, and I think if he did, that would have shown that this was an inside job involving a family member, because I think that would be the best way to gain access. You simply took Nancy's remote and cloned it, and that would help you. We also know that they didn't use the front door. Had the front door not been accessed at all, this would also indicate someone familiar with the property, someone who knew about that camera and would have known to avoid it. I've seen some unconfirmed reports that forced entry was through a sliding door, and sliding doors are well known to be easy to break into. Just have a look at this.
Just broke into your house.
If you have a sliding door, I want you to take precautions, security precautions around it, because sliding doors have locks that are easy to pick. They advertise what's in your home. You simply look through the glass. They are often in the backyard, meaning they provide privacy for breaking and entering from passers-by, and they're made of glass. If all else fails, if they can't break the lock, they simply break the glass. Now, we know in the Idaho 4 case, entry was by a stranger who had limited knowledge of the home through a glass sliding door that probably wasn't locked. In this case, I suspect the knowledge of the home was even more limited, but entry was achieved essentially through trial and error. By the way, something else that's very intertextual in terms of the Idaho 4 case is that they tracked Koberger through his vehicle, even a fuzzy footage of the vehicle, and went through something like 20,000 white Hyundai Elantras, but they did narrow it down, and they would have been able to find Koberger even without DNA. The same applies in this case. But the important clue that I think everyone has missed is that the point of entry, I think they call it ingress, tells us a lot about the perpetrator, but most specifically who he isn't, and that then excludes people that are familiar and family members. Does that make sense? Well, I'm not going to take it further than that, but I will be doing another video on a limited series that is likely to be coming to Paramount Plus later this month on the John Benet Ramsey case, so look out for that. Well, thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.